Step 1, take a hammer to the bathroom scale. Step 2, rip up all the diet rule books. And step 3, get ready to redefine what health and well-being means to you. And guess what? It's not your weight, it's not your shape, and it's not how much space you take up. Welcome to Body Kindness. I'm Rebecca Scritchfield. I'm the author of the book Body Kindness and host for this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I ask that you keep an open mind as we have interesting conversations about what it means in this culture to resist and reject and divest from the norms of health is only for people who are pursuing thinness and weight loss and dieting. We can say no to that. That does not help many people create a better life. But through this show and our conversations, I am confident that you will find your own meaningful path to a happier and healthier life. Even if you want things to change, that's okay. But we have a whole lot of unlearning to do, and I invite you to join me on the unlearning.
We're going down, clown.
Well, you just heard me having a scale smash party. That is actual audio from me smashing a stack of scales in front of a group of friends. And didn't it sound like a lot of fun? So if you want to learn more about how you can break up with the scale, and yes, I mean that attachment to the specific number, but I also mean the other scales that we use to measure ourselves. It could be attachment to certain ways of eating. It could be attachment to smaller clothes. It could be the fantasies we have in our minds about the way life should be right now, rather than thinking about how to be good to ourselves and make changes with a sense of self-compassion instead of shame. So free summer challenge all summer long, bodykindnessbook.com/scale smash. And I'm going to help you out with some interesting reflective prompts and motivation and inspiration. And I really hope to see pictures and videos of you smashing your scale too.
I don't weigh the vast majority of my patients. There's no reason for the vast majority of your listeners ever to get weighed, except unless they're receiving anesthesia, where the medications need to be dosed appropriate to body size, or chemo. We can refuse. It's a process of consent. And, doctors can mistakenly or manipulatively say, well, I'm not going to get reimbursed unless I put a weight down. But the law is that if the doctor documents patient declined getting a weight, that counts for reimbursement.
That was Jennifer Gaudiani. She's the founder and medical director of the Gaudiani Clinic. Board certified in internal medicine. She completed her undergraduate degree at Harvard Medical School at Boston University School of Medicine, and her internal medicine residency and chief residency at Yale. So quite an accomplished guest on the podcast today. Dr. Gaudiani has been a leader in the eating disorders field for over 10 years and served as a medical director at the Acute Center for Eating Disorders prior to founding the Gaudiani Clinic, which is a Denver-based outpatient medical clinic dedicated to people with eating disorders and disordered eating. The Gaudiani Clinic is a health at every size and form provider and embraces treating people of all shapes and sizes. The Gaudiani Clinic is licensed to practice in over 25 U.S. states via telemedicine and offers international professional consultation and education. And I do talk with Dr. Gaudiani about her book called Sick Enough, and you could check that out and buy it. It's great for practitioners as well as people in recovery and their family members. I also had the pleasure of visiting with Dr. Gaudiani and presenting as well at the Weight Stigma Conference. And I sat in on her keynote and took some pictures of slides because I knew I wanted to share them with you when I was going to be releasing this podcast. So these were on her slides talking about weight-inclusive medical care. She says here, I am aware that higher weight can contribute to the development of certain medical problems, but I will never recommend weight loss or change of body as a treatment. I find that to be very radical. P.S. That's why I'm reading these. Again, except when monitoring nutritional rehabilitation, I will never check or discuss a patient's weight except in so much as to provide a safe space for them to have feelings about it. I will not perpetuate diet culture on my patients or ally my medical recommendations with society's weight biases. Again, radical. This doesn't happen in typical outpatient centers, typical physicians. And it continues, I will respect body diversity and I will understand this patient's weight narrative as occurring in the context of a lifetime of traumas and externally imposed restriction cycles. These have altered her metabolism and conditioned her cave person brain to be ultra sensitive even to the thought, much less action, of dietary restraint, responding in a biologically life-saving way by making her more prone to binge eat. Ultimately, if my patient does develop any of the medical issues associated with higher weight, I will treat them with her if she desires, because that's my job as an internist. So I was really inspired by her ideas, and it really motivated me to think about what if that was the philosophy of every physician practicing? What a paradigm shift we would have. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Please share it with anyone who takes care of you or anyone you care about. If you have feedback for me, it's Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. Hey, Dr. G, welcome to Body Kindness.
Thank you so much for having me.
I cannot wait to talk to you today. We're going to have such an important conversation about everything that sucks in medicine and how it can be better.
There's so much to say about that.
So what I like to start out the show with is by letting listeners know, like, how did this person get to be a guest? And 9 times out of 10, it is because I have some sort of personal story behind it and some sort of meaningful reason why. And essentially, I came to know you through a Health at Every Size professionals group. And you are a rare specimen from our group because you are a medical doctor and a medical doctor who specializes in helping people in eating disorder recovery. So it's like literally the diamond in the rough. And I've long admired you and looked up to you and been so grateful that you're here. And what finally prompted the conversation is you have this wonderful, important, amazing book out that so many people need to get, and we'll get into it. But it's called Sick Enough, A Guide to the Medical Complications of Eating Disorders. So with all the gratitude, I would love for you to start by just letting folks know a little bit more about yourself and your background and what you do, why you do it.
I would love to. And thanks for that lovely connection. I grew up in Northern California, the oldest of 3 girls, went back east for college where I was an English major and a pre-med. And when I got to medical school, my middle sister, who was generous enough to allow me to share her story, came to college and had developed an eating disorder. I didn't know anything about eating disorders except that I loved her unconditionally and suspected that wouldn't be enough. And she got a wonderful therapist and really struggled with bulimia nervosa until her mid-20s, at which point, thankfully, she really became fully recovered. But seeing her struggle so brave, so hard, influenced me deeply as a budding physician. I had no idea that I would end up doing anything professionally in eating disorders, but it made a huge impact on me. So I became an internist because I'm nerdy that way. An internist, for those who don't know, is somebody who doesn't do surgery and doesn't take care of pregnant people or kids, but basically nerdily tries to put together the story of how the body connects. And I did my residency and chief residency and then came out to Denver about 12 years ago, where I started working for the inner city teaching hospital for the University of Colorado. And I was a hospitalist, meaning an internist who only sees hospital patients. And about a year into my employment, the head physician of the hospital system at the time sent out an email to my group saying, would anybody be interested in helping me grow and run the country's only hospital based multidisciplinary medical stabilization unit for adults whose anorexia nervosa has become so life-threatening they cannot safely receive care anywhere else. And as a feminist and pregnant at the time with my second daughter and with my sister's history, I immediately volunteered. And, despite the fact that I am an anxious, harm-avoidant, perfectionistic physician who believes in her privilege that she can control everything in her life, the fact is that sometimes things just happen by great fortune that change the course of everything. And this was one of those things. So I had the great joy of helping to run and grow that unit called the Acute Center for Eating Disorders for 8 years, and left on good terms, having fallen in love with the whole field. I loved my patients. I loved the whole 9 yards. And I opened my outpatient clinic, the Gaudiani Clinic, in 2016 for a variety of reasons. But among them, I wanted to have a longer relationship with patients than during their brief 2-week hospitalization. I want to know the whole arc of a story. That's the English major in me. Mm-hmm. And I also really didn't like how patients, when they would relapse and come back and be readmitted, would tell me, Dr. G, I have to get so sick to come and see you. And I thought, that is totally not the focus here. In outpatient, I want the focus to be, you have to stay well enough to be in relationship with me. So I started my clinic with the goal of seeing patients of all genders, ages, body shapes, and sizes from all over the country because I do telemedicine. And I wanted to manage the medical aspects of the eating disorder that came about because of an eating disorder, as well as to help ameliorate the more non-measurable complications that might not be related to an eating disorder, but that was getting in the way of people's recoveries. And I get to work in a multidisciplinary fashion with treatment teams, dietitians, and therapists around the country, and I love it. But I had to do some serious work learning about size diversity because I had only ever been an expert really in anorexia nervosa. So I came in with the intention of taking care of people across the body spectrum, but I had a lot of learning to do. And I have been profoundly grateful, like to my very cells, for teachers like Carmen Kuhl and Hillary Canavy, Deb Berghard. These are people who gave generously of their time to help course correct me in my ignorance and in my ability to do harm as a physician who was not trained properly, but who didn't even question some of the fundamental tenets that I now know to have been so wrong. And so my work within weight-inclusive care is one of my greatest passions in my business. And of course, it applies across the body spectrum. It is a feminist issue. It's also a humanist issue. And I find myself here today continuing to learn like crazy and just loving bringing a weight-inclusive perspective to all of my patients.
Yeah, and that was amazing, by the way. And the short response that I want to say to that, kind of from the dietitian side of it, is right when similar names of teachers and many more, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh, thank you for helping me. And you have this question like, how could I have gotten it wrong so many times for so long? And then you're like, your eyes are more open and you're doing better. And you're like, oh my God, why isn't everybody else in my field doing this? And so it becomes this awakening and reawakening, and then even feelings, emotions of anger of like, why are there so many problems and injustices? And it sometimes, I feel like you can feel a bit hopeless about it. And then it's like, you remember the people you're working with and you remember what it takes in any social justice movement to get done and make the world a better place, basically.
Amen, sister. You are speaking some serious truth. And boy, have I gotten it wrong before. And I've gotten it wrong again and again and again, well into my process of learning. I mean, I'm constantly learning to challenge my internalized thin bias and finding it crop up in interesting places and then being like, okay, nope, screwed that one up again. Let me try again. And I love that process, and it really keeps me humble.
Anyway, what I want to do to kind of put a wrapper around the whole conversation is actually start at a place where I think every listener could likely relate to. And that has to do with the idea that hopefully we have medical care. And so we have the privilege of at least getting to see a doctor, going to a doctor's appointment. And anyone who in our recent years is going to see a doctor, there is a process. They walk in the door, they check in. Before they see the doctor, they're going to be told to get on a scale. They're going to get a weight, and they're likely going to calculate their BMI. And depending on what that number is, or the mood of the doctor or the doctor's experience, there's going to be words about weight and health and shoulds and shouldn'ts. And that's just the reality. I mean, so we're talking like this literally impacts everybody. And a lot of potential harm is being done. I went into my group for body kindness readers, and I was like, can you tell me some stories? And it was everything from my wrists separately felt sprained and something wasn't right and it was getting in the way of my quality of life. And I got a lecture from the first doctor that my weight was causing this wrist trouble, gave me splints, and she just knew enough to know that it wasn't right, and that, kind of felt like I'm taking care of myself. And anyway, after extensive testing, it was rheumatoid arthritis, and it had nothing to do with the weight. And the list goes on from there. Actually, somebody else said that she was having ideation of suicide, and the doctor told her that the medication would add weight, so lose weight, then you'll be happier. And yeah, all that, you get the extremes, right? That this isn't right. This is really messed up. And at that same time, we can say, don't just other the extreme situations, because there's a lot of BS happening even in the average appointment. And that's where I want to start with you. And that acknowledgement of the average appointment, weight is centered. Tell me from your perspective, what is wrong with medicine today, and how is it more likely to harm people than help them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really is at the core of my patient's experience too. Where does one even begin? Well, I think probably the best place to begin is an acknowledgement of my own privilege, because this is something I've done a lot of thinking about over the last couple of years. So I think it's important in the spirit of BETA to say that I am a white, smaller bodied, cis, hetero, able, highly educated woman. And that set of facts gives me easier passage through life in ways that I am completely unaware of and that are denied to many people who don't experience the privilege that I do. So knowing that and staying grounded in that reality not only keeps me more aware of the diversity of other people's experiences, but it makes me passionately keen to put the force of my privilege behind topics like weight-inclusive care, health at every size, and the ways in which physicians and medical providers specifically do such serious damage. And so I want to start there. Mm-hmm. The fact is, you cannot tell whether someone is healthy or sick by looking at them. That's just such an important statement to start with, because that reality, which is scientific truth, means that the act of checking somebody's weight and correlating it with their height in the form of the completely useless BMI sets us up for nothing but stigma. It does not inform us about someone's wellness. Look, I have taken care of people with eating disorders for over a decade now, and I have patients in my clinic who could be on the cover of a body-oriented magazine. And people would say, oh my goodness, she's so beautiful, she's so healthy. And in reality, this person is in multi-organ failure and experiences catastrophic torment on the daily. So that isn't health, and yet they're wearing a body that society equates with wellness. And, I think in my own practice, it's even hard for me to use the word health these days because it has been taken over by diet industry to be sort of a sly keyword for youth, lighter skinned, smaller bodied, able, et cetera, because that is privilege. And so, as an internist, of course, I have to focus on health, but I try to at least name to my patients that when I use that word sparingly, I'm never meaning that it's the kind of health that supposedly emerges from a narrowly defined stereotype of constructed beauty. So, I don't weigh the vast majority of my patients. There's no reason for the vast majority of your listeners ever to get weighed, except unless they're receiving anesthesia, where the medications need to be dosed appropriate to body size, or chemo. We can refuse. It's a process of consent. And, doctors can mistakenly or manipulatively say, well, I'm not going to get reimbursed unless I put a weight down. But the law is that if the doctor documents patient declined getting a weight, that counts for reimbursement. Now, there's power in the room. A patient-doctor relationship contains power. So it can be very hard and possibly impossible for someone who has less privilege to speak up in the doctor's office and say, I don't want you to weigh me, because depending on what the spirit of that practice is, that may set up a dynamic in which the patient becomes labeled. There's a lot of complexities here. It's never as easy as just say no to weighing. But for those who wish to assert themselves in that way and feel safe doing so, you are allowed. And it is scientifically appropriate to decline a weight. So really the only patients that I do weights on are those in whom I am personally overseeing weight restoration. And that's it.
That was so well said and very, very important information. A lot of people really don't know that being weighed is an optional screen. It just, the way that it's set, right? Time efficiency, you don't even get a chance to meet your doctor or talk to your doctor. It's just assumed that you're going to do this because stop bothering them and everyone's too busy. And that really is the sentiment. I mean, the fact that the burden is even on the patient, that's the unfortunate reality that you and I have to talk about today, that basically we're sorry that the burden is on you to decide, I don't want this screening. It's assumed that it's okay to do whatever you want with my weight and my body before I even go in. But because I'm sick or I need your care, now I've got to take the extra steps to say, hey, it's not okay to do this. And with fear and anxiety that I might get pushback, I might be ridiculed. And that's a lot of burden to carry. And to your point about power structures, it shouldn't be on the patient's responsibility, but the system, the way it is now, that's just the fact that we have to own and accept and say, we're sorry that it's this way and you shouldn't have to own all this labor. But if there's a silver lining in that, if you want to opt out, that you can do that and you can find ways to emotionally prepare yourself to do that.
Exactly.
So I just, for some, that's not going to be the first time that they've heard that information. And then yet it feels like not enough. If you know what I mean, right? Like yeah. We can't possibly stop at that. And I just think of all the different ways in which medical practitioners might defend, oh, it's just a piece of information, or oh, it just might help me. Or, I mean, even in running weight management programs, right? I feel that what I see happen in many different spaces culturally, but including in the field of medicine, that there's this othering of everything eating disorder. Do you know what I mean? Oh, well, that's eating disorder and there's special things that need to be done there. And how, and even how you talked about health is diet culture is stealing what it means to be healthy. And we need to kind of reframe even what we think of with respect to that. I think that's part of the problem that feeds into medicine, but they're also othering eating disorders, as if, yes, on the one hand, it is radical today to say, hey, you can refuse your weight. And on the other hand, if we keep the burden on the individuals, I mean, how is anything going to change in medicine with weight stigma? It feels pretty hopeless. I wonder what you think.
Well, I think you're right. I think othering is a great word for it, and it goes beyond that. I think that medicine, so there's very few internists in the United States who specialize in eating disorders because I think in part there's a desire not to engage with the entire topic, despite their prevalence and deadly nature, and how many physical symptoms emerge from eating disorders that absolutely need a good doctor. So, I just hear so many tales, Rebecca, about how a patient with anorexia nervosa, standard anorexia nervosa, is praised in the office for their so-called health, and the doctor believes their low heart rate is due to being an athlete. Mm-hmm. And I hear stories, so that patient leaves the office confused and made invisible, mm-hmm. and is going to find recovery efforts vastly the more difficult because the medical system has just spoken with the voice of the eating disorder. And I've seen patients with atypical anorexia nervosa with all of the same torments and the same behaviors who don't happen to be in a visibly emaciated body, not only invisible in the doctor's office, but praised for restriction and other behaviors that are so clearly pathological and unhealthy, or they're prescribed those very behaviors that somebody should be trying to challenge. I've seen people with bulimia nervosa be missed completely and not medically attended to, or not even believed that they have an eating disorder, because even though the vast majority of people with eating disorders are not emaciated, that remains the sort of hallmark stereotypical image, even in medical providers' minds. And we haven't even then gotten to patients in larger body sizes who may have binge eating disorder or who may not, who are, just categorically given poorer medical care because of size stigma. And the act of stigmatizing somebody, of course, makes them much less likely to seek evidence-based screening maneuvers, for instance, or to seek help when they need it. And that results in worse health outcomes. So unfortunately, the medical complex is responsible for quite a lot of harm, even if their intention isn't to cause it. And here's a great example of where it isn't intention, it's impact that we have to pay attention to. The impact is harmful. Doctors telling patients to lose weight without hearing, at all, ever, because that's never okay, but without ever hearing the narrative of the patient's relationship with their body, food, trauma, eating disorders, prior medications, family history, causes restriction of calories because doctors wield power. And the act of depriving ourselves of calories sets off a knowable biological response in what I call our cave person brain, which evolved through the millennia to save us from starvation. So by that, I mean, anybody who restricts calories, even for a couple of days, will trigger the unconscious part of our brain that runs us as a mammal and has been finely tuned to save us from dying of malnutrition, because humans evolved primarily during a time of want, not excess. And so whether it's in the service of an eating disorder, disordered eating, quote unquote, clean eating, a diet, a fast, or even food deprivation due to lack of access to food, our brain will make physiologic changes to preserve our weight, slow our metabolism, and change how our brain thinks about food and our bodies. Those changes were highly protective and helped us survive as a species for the vast majority of human history. But in this day and age, those same things are then responsible for all sorts of other problems. So one of the things that I hate most is when I'm giving my weight inclusive spiel to a group of physicians and they say, how can you possibly be talking about this when we have such a quote unquote, this is the only time you'll ever hear me say this word, obesity epidemic. And I'll say to them, outside of big food and the big cosmetic and diet industries, physicians have caused this epidemic because we've been telling people to deprive themselves. And there is a biological response to that, which is to crave food to slow the metabolism. And the body will make sure that its weight rises as soon as food is available to protect us from the next famine.
That's so amazing. First of all, I want to be in the room when you tell a bunch of doctors that doctors caused the O word epidemic. I would pay to be there. Let's make that happen. Because I could imagine that like uncomfortable silence where people need to hear something that they're completely ignoring. I'm from another reader. She said, right now, I'm barely holding it together, being triggered by getting the message from my doctor that my recent diagnosis of diabetes is my fault because I'm fat. And then, of course, I feel like I don't deserve to eat. Right. And it's like, and I picked that response for a specific reason because you're right. Like, medicine is part of the problem. Dietitians are part of the problem, right? So you and I are absolutely 100% both part of the problem, being related to how we were trained and even the privilege that got us to our education levels, of upholding this idea that health and weight are tied together. And we have to have the burden of separating ourselves from the societal things like big food and diet culture and all that, and say, hey, if we are actually going to call ourselves healthcare providers, then what are we using as our frame for determining health? So that when that client comes and they have a diabetes diagnosis and they say, hey, I'd really like to lose some weight and manage my diabetes, that healthcare provider should know that even if the person is asking for it, culture, right? Do Whole30, et cetera, they should be educated enough to know about weight stigma and the harms. And it's not saying, hey, you're never going to lose weight or don't bother exercise. You're not going to tell people to stop taking care of themselves. That is where health and healing begin, right? Where you can help people practice self-compassion and positive self-care within their abilities, needs, and interests. And yet, if today we were like going on Twitter looking for people who run diabetes programs, right? 9 times out of 10, whether it's private, group, across socioeconomic spectrums, maybe there's free community programs, they're going to be centered around weight management.
I know. It's super misguided and it is harmful. I love taking care of patients because I'm an eating disorder doctor. The patients that I see in larger bodies may have atypical anorexia, they may have bulimia nervosa, they may have binge eating disorder. By no means do I want to imply in what I'm about to talk about that all of those in larger bodies have any sort of an eating disorder. Of course, that's not the case, but that's the population I see. So when I see someone, for instance, with binge eating disorder who's in a larger body and who has diabetes, I absolutely love taking care of them because I say, I'm never going to weigh you. And weight is never going to be an outcome we discuss. I am happy to hold listening to your narrative about the ways in which you're harmed by society as a result of your weight. But I am never going to ally myself with that greater philosophy and continue to cause harm to you. So this is never going to be about weight loss. What I am going to tell you is that when we do weight inclusive care, when you nourish yourself for joy and for your energy needs with plenty of caloric intake, never feeling restricted or like you have to avoid any particular food group, feeling satisfaction throughout the day. And if moving for joy within your ability and interest is going to help promote your values and your goals, and we do those things, I am telling you, your diabetes care will almost invariably improve. I have multiple patients whose diabetes is completely resolved within a year using health at every size, weight inclusive care. And in saying that, I don't mean to stigmatize the act of having diabetes or any other chronic illness, but where that is within patients' interest and values, and as an internist, it makes sense to me that the more, not having diabetes is easier on your body than having diabetes. I see patients who are on 200 or 300 units of insulin a day have no diabetes at the end of a year doing weight inclusive care. So again, when my physician colleagues are like, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't recommend weight loss? What happens to them medically? I say, what happens to them medically is better than what happens to them medically under diet culture. That's what happens to them medically.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know. And it's right. Like if we were to follow Brene Brown, and what's the most generous assumption you can make about people, right? The most generous assumption we can make when we're talking to the medical community is that they are health at every size, unaware. And it becomes this, where we once were, right? And so it becomes this element of doing the work to meet people where they are, but saying and doing the things you need to do to help them want to do better and hope they want it enough. Because in the system and structure that they are given, we're not saying it's easy peasy, here's your rule book and checklist, but that you have to care enough to be able to make that migration. And you are an example that it is possible, but I'm trusting that the health at every size doctors are finding each other and, trying to figure out, hey, how do we work within our system and structure to make a difference? Because why aren't we there yet? And what can you and I do in these words that we're having dynamically move us forward? And I would just love to know your insight on health at every size medical care, steps forward, compassion toward other physicians who aren't yet there.
Yeah, the role of physician in this day and age is a very, very challenging one, and is its own super broad, separate topic. Mm-hmm. But as soon as I understood what health at every size and intuitive eating, weight inclusive care meant, I was like, oh, of course. Yes. So I was totally bought in, but then it's in the moment to moment dialogue that you learn to challenge old assumptions. And having provided this care to people of all shapes and sizes now for almost 3 years, what I can say is it works medically so beautifully. And I always begin by asking patients, what are their values and goals, so that I try not to be assumptive, imposing my own imaginings or values upon them. But, where I have a patient who's wheelchair bound related to significant fluid retention, as well as higher body weight and muscular weakness, who can walk maybe 5 steps to a chair and then is really winded, that same patient, when supported with an expert dietitian and therapist who are HAES informed as well, and with myself, a year later is hiking with poles around her family's home and climbing the stairs in her home again and driving again. These are profound medical improvements that are congruent with the patient's stated personal goals. I'm not establishing what health means and then sort of requiring every person to get there, but they're getting better. They are achieving their experience of what they want in their body, totally separate from weight, because in weight inclusive care, the weight may go up, it may go down, it may stay the same, but their medical status radically improves. And so many people carry deep internalized weight stigma and keep yearning for the smaller body that signals to society a whole list of things that aren't fair to associate with a body size. But HAES practitioners can continue to hold space for that distress and desire, and yet not condone them or recommend them. And like, my hope is that as podcasts like this get out into the world, practitioners go, oh, I didn't even know there was another way. I thought the only way forward was to recommend caloric restraint and to focus on weight loss. But you're saying that we could focus on good, balanced, nourishing, delicious food throughout the day and movement within ability and interest. And that actually does better? Oh, well, obviously I would want to do that then. Why not?
Oh gosh. Yes. That is a big hope of mine. And it also it's a reasonable path as well. Like I think it's reasonable that could happen, which makes me feel good. There are two kind of barriers that keep popping in my mind. And one is on the individual level from a physician, because I know how this feels like for myself, but like when you're needing to face your own bias and confront your own bias, it's really uncomfortable. And I think it can lead to, avoiding, flaking, fleeing, just like, nope, not going to do it. And here I'm going to defend what I currently need to do. Or even if not defend it, but, oh, well, this is my job and I follow what the hospital says. And so just nothing. And then the second one has to do with, frankly, like the business of medicine and the business of weight management and bariatric surgeries. And so anything from surgery all the way to the fasting program. So thoughts on those barriers to overcome?
They're huge barriers, Rebecca. You're absolutely right. I mean, the barriers abound. I think lest we become bewildered and go crawl into our cave and just cry, which, sometimes we do have to have a little cry in the cave. We have to then reemerge and say, change is only made little bits at a time. And then little bits of change become a little bit of momentum, always with roadblocks, but then a little bit more momentum overcomes more of those roadblocks. And look, the dieting industry, the big food industry, and, the beauty industry stand to lose tremendously if people stop feeling like their bodies are inadequate, therefore their voices should be silenced. That is a major, major barrier. There is always going to be primary gain from those industries keeping us feeling bad about ourselves, feeling insecure, less than, caring for ourselves or acting on our own behalf on a conditional basis, only if my body looks like this, only if my hair looks like this. But it's working. When I got into the eating disorder field, no one was talking about HAES. Now, that is a central accepted premise, at least within our own industry. And my hope and belief is that it's going to continue to build. I'm writing a paper right now with Carmen Kuhl and Aaron Flores, and we're going to present a case series of patients and show how extraordinarily well weight-inclusive care does for them medically, as well as being right for them psychologically and nutritionally. So it's going to happen. We just have to keep working away at it.
I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it. But I have a great idea that I'm going to start with helping professionals, but it really is everybody can do. And that is get a copy of Sick Enough that I am holding and hugging. And as I smile and talk to you about it right now, because you can make time to seek information. You can get the book, look through the table of contents and pick what sounds interesting or read it cover to cover, but you will be guided through, at least a better understanding of the medical complications of eating disorders, which even if you're a helping professional who doesn't specialize in people struggling with eating disorders and helping them recover, it doesn't mean that you won't end up seeing them one way or another, maybe helping being part of the discovery and diagnosis and referring to proper care, or even just better at helping the people you are serving at being able to focus on self-care and well-being and not only eating disorders, but on the spectrum of disordered eating and body image concerns, which, it grows and grows and grows. So I think there's a very strong chance that in any area of work you do in the helping profession, you're going to meet somebody, work with someone, talk to someone who you're going to be able to share something you got from this book that is going to help them. I just love it. You did an amazing job with it.
I so appreciate that ringing endorsement. And that was what I hoped for when I wrote it. I wrote it for individuals, for their loved ones, and for professionals who might interact in any way with someone with a history of an eating disorder or disordered eating. And I hoped that in the case presentations and the insistence on the diversity of body sizes and genders, ages, races, backgrounds of people who do develop eating disorders, that there might be an improvement in representation. And that's one of the reasons that I picked diverse portraits for the cover, so that someone picking up the book might look at it and say, oh, I kind of see myself in there. That's funny. I didn't know I could be represented in that too.
And I happen to have some side knowledge that you had to fight for that cover.
I did. I had to fight for the title and I had to fight for the cover. And I'm so grateful that I was able to make my voice heard.
Yes, exactly. And because it does, it really adds to the meaning behind it. And I know folks are going to pick it up just because we've had such a powerful conversation already, but I do want to share at least some of the highlights. So it's broken up into different parts. And in part 1, the focus is not enough calories. So you are going to go into detail in a readable way, might I add. Anyone can read and absorb this, and we're busy, but we can clip it away bit by bit and you're going to get useful information. But I mean, absolutely, we all need to better understand what happens when we don't have enough calories. The second part is about purging. And I think this is another area that gets othered often, but it's helpful information to know, especially if you or someone you care about is struggling with any type of purging behavior, or something that you might, say, oh, well, she just really likes to exercise. He, or they, just likes to exercise. It is really important to understand what's happening there. And you already mentioned it, but without question, the fact of being able to talk about weight stigma and higher weight people with eating disorders that's radical. That's very radical to have a book in my hands and to have that happening in a book. And let's hope as time goes on, it's less and less radical. But then you also talk about unmeasurables, which is really interesting. So everything from IBS to POTS, which I have both of those in my client caseload. And then finally, specific populations. And yes, I think it did a really good job at trying to be as inclusive as possible. And even in topic areas where a lot of people don't necessarily have even an awareness that could be an eating disorder, such as ARFID, and orthorexia, that's still kind of being paired apart. But 9 times out of 10, like you were mentioning earlier, that celebrated doctor's appointment for a higher weight person who's losing weight / their hair might also be falling out because they're restricting on super healthy Whole30, that isn't healthy. And in that tone, and it's like helping people understand that there are things you can do that are self-care that might remind you of diet culture, right? Like as you get better and heal, there's still going to be broccoli at the grocery store, right? And so it's not that I got to stay away from vegetables forever the rest of my life. It's more about as you get better and throughout just literally healing and nurturing what has been broken and changing your relationship to how you take care of your body and food and movement and all those things that used to be hijacked by diet culture.
Well said.
But yeah, the book is wonderful. And is it available everywhere, Amazon and all the other places?
It is available on Amazon.com. It is not very available in bookstores at this point. So the best bet is Amazon or on the Routledge website.
Okay, that's awesome. And where can people get in touch with you if they want to become a patient or just make sure that they are always getting your best information?
Absolutely. So our website is www.gaudianiclinic.com, Gaudiani Clinic.com. My wonderful partner, Dr. Rosen, and I both see patients from all over the country. On our website, you'll find frequently asked questions, as well as all of our blogs, podcasts, short videos, resources that all support our weight-inclusive perspective here.
That's great. And I'll include all those links in the show notes and on my blog. And you've been so helpful. And it's really, I feel like almost like a sense of relief to get to talk to you, to kind of, share the struggles and the difficulties, but also this sense of hope that things are getting better and they will continue to get better. And we've got to take meaningful actions in our own lives in any way possible, because that's all part of how we create this slow and meaningful shift in culture. So thank you so much for your time today.
That's so beautifully said. Thank you for all that you do. And thank you so much for having me.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.